10 Ways Prisons Torture Inmates in Modern Times. Welcome back to Creepshow. Today, we're shedding light on a disturbing reality that too many choose to ignore: the torture and inhumane treatment of inmates in modern prisons. As a public defender, I've witnessed the horrific abuses that incarcerated individuals, both guilty and innocent, endure every day. Despite the growing awareness around prisoners' rights and the coverage these issues receive, a troubling myth persists that inmates somehow receive better treatment than the average person. Many believe that prisoners have no rights and therefore deserve whatever fate befalls them. This misconception fuels a dangerous indifference to the pain and suffering that occur behind bars. In this video, we'll explore 10 shocking practices that illustrate the harrowing conditions faced by those in our correctional systems. Prepare yourself, as these revelations may challenge your perceptions and leave you questioning the very nature of justice in America. Number 10. Scalding Showers. In 2012, prison authorities subjected Darren Rainey to a horrific fate. They forced him to take a 2-hour shower in scalding water, so hot it reached 82 degrees Celsius, or 180 degrees Fahrenheit. This was hot enough to cook a cup of overpriced ramen from the prison commissary. The water burned over 90% of Rainey's body. As staff members pulled his limp body from the shower, his skin sloughed off. They had, in essence, cooked him alive. What was his offense? Rainey, who suffered from schizophrenia, had defecated in his cell. When Harriet Krikowski, a former counselor at the Dade Correctional Institution, asked a guard how they planned to handle Rainey, the guard calmly replied, "Oh, don't worry. We'll put him in the shower." Krikowski assumed this meant he would receive a proper cleaning. The next day, she learned the grim truth. The guards had locked Rainey in a claustrophobic stall and, by force, showered him with a hose. Only the guards had control over the water temperature. Because the shower was so small, Rainey had no escape from the scalding water. Nearby inmates reported hearing Rainey scream for help during the 2-hour ordeal. Rainey was serving a sentence for cocaine possession, a non-violent offense. Yet, he was treated like a lobster in a boiling pot. According to his fellow inmates, Rainey was not the first to be locked in the shower under these brutal conditions. However, he was the first to die from it. Number 9. Forcing inmates to fight. Mandingo. Fighting, a gruesome practice where slaves were forced to fight to the death, has been widely discredited. Yet, in modern correctional facilities across the United States, a chilling parallel persists. Guards force predominantly minority inmates to fight one another for entertainment. In San Francisco's main jail, reserved for pretrial detainees and those serving short sentences, these forced fights have been dubbed gladiator matches. According to San Francisco public defender Jeff Adachi, guards place bets on who they believe will win. If inmates refuse to fight, they face threats of violence, including rape. Adachi described the situation as an outrageously sadistic scenario that sounds like it's out of Game of Thrones. Former inmate Rico Paliquico Garcia recounted his terrifying experience. Under the threat of being beaten or tased, he participated in these brutal fights, which left him with broken ribs. Guards warned inmates not to be honest about their injuries, instructing them to cover up the truth. One guard allegedly told an inmate to claim he had fallen from his bunk when seeking medical attention. Another victim, Stanley Harris, was forced to do push-ups in preparation for the fights. He claimed that prison staff threatened him with anal rape if he did not comply. Number 8. Withholding pads and tampons. Across the United States, many jails and prisons fail to provide female inmates with free pads and tampons. Those that do often suffer from a severe undersupply. Indigent inmates, who make up the majority of the prison population, are forced to get creative. They fashion makeshift sanitary napkins from toilet paper, socks, prison slippers, and anything else they can find. Unfortunately, these homemade solutions frequently lead to illness and infection. This humiliating practice forces inmates to bleed through their prison scrubs, often while being monitored by male guards. Perhaps that's why, according to an ACLU lawsuit, some correctional facilities withhold these critical supplies as a means of punishment. But this is not the only way female inmates face harsh treatment. As a public interest attorney, I have witnessed members of this vulnerable population subjected to sexual assault during unsanitary and unsafe gynecological exams. I've heard stories of inmates shackled while giving birth, with too tight cuffs digging into their wrists and ankles as they endure intense contractions. I have also heard accounts of female inmates being leered at and subjected to racial slurs while forced to use the toilet in front of male guards. Number 7. Refusing to provide basic medical care. It took Tyler Tabor, who was held in the Adams County Jail in Pennsylvania in 2015, 3 full days to die from heroin withdrawal, according to attorney David Lane, who represents Tabor's family in a civil suit. Tabor told the jail he was suffering from withdrawal and begged them for an IV, which would have saved his life. Unassisted drug withdrawal can lead to severe complications, including grand mal seizures and dehydration. Tabor's bond was only $300, but his family chose to leave him in jail to detox, assuming he could do so safely at a government-run facility. In another Pennsylvania correctional facility, Victoria Torrey Hare was also in dire straits. She had been using approximately 10 bags of heroin a day and was experiencing severe withdrawal symptoms. During a jail call 3 days after her arrest, Hare told her mother, "I'm seeing people die. I'm going to die." Despite informing jail staff members of her addiction, Hare did not receive any medical intervention until it was too late. She eventually lost consciousness and was transported to a hospital, where she died after being taken off life support. Number 6. Ignoring cries for help. Only a few hours after prison workers forced him into a cell with an inmate known for violent altercations, Ricky Martin, incarcerated at Florida's Santa Rosa Correctional Institution, was found dead. In March 2012, guards discovered Martin beaten to a pulp. His skull was smashed, and his body was black and blue. He had apparently been restrained and noosed with torn fabric. The prison scrubs he wore were soaked with blood and pulled over his head, perhaps indicating a horrific assault. Earlier, Martin had reportedly begged to be moved to a new cell, expressing fear for his life. Witnesses to the beating recall hearing screams and thuds. Evidence suggests that the perpetrator, inmate Sean Jiggaman Rogers, used a sock stuffed with batteries. Those same witnesses reported that Rogers jumped on Martin's head multiple times, smashing it into the concrete floor. Yet despite Martin's repeated cries for help, prison staff failed to respond until it was too late. During the attack, other inmates pleaded with officers to assist Martin. Video footage taken during the incident shows a guard glancing inside the cell, but ultimately refusing to come to Martin's aid. Number 5. Dehydration, starvation, and solitary confinement. In 2016, Terrell Thomas died of dehydration while confined in Milwaukee County Jail. The medical examiner who conducted Thomas's autopsy described his dehydration as profound. At the time of his death, Thomas, who struggled with mental illness, was in his 10th day of solitary confinement. Corrections officers claimed they turned off Thomas's water supply after he flooded his cell. According to Thomas's family, this was nothing short of torture. Witnesses reported hearing Thomas begging for water for several days. In an email statement, Sheriff David Clark refused to comment on the lawsuit, but took the opportunity to highlight Thomas's alleged criminal background, as if it justified his preventable death. "I have nearly 1,000 inmates," Clark stated. "I don't know all their names, but is this the guy who was in custody for shooting up the Potawatomi Casino, causing one man to be hit by gunfire while in possession of a firearm as a career convicted felon? The media never reports that in stories about him. If that is him, then at least I know who you are talking about." Number 4. Botched executions. When he was sentenced to die for the 1994 murder of a convenience store clerk, Ronald Smith Jr. was promised a quick, painless death. In fact, he wasn't even supposed to die. A jury had voted to recommend life imprisonment without parole. Unfortunately, in Alabama, where Smith was convicted, judges can and routinely do override jury recommendations. Smith's execution was neither quick nor painless. Alabama used the controversial drug midazolam, which has been implicated in several botched executions. Many argue that this drug cannot reliably induce unconsciousness. In fact, the FDA has refused to approve midazolam for use as a standalone anesthetic. This became painfully evident during Smith's execution, which lasted 34 minutes. For 13 of those minutes, Smith struggled for breath. He heaved, coughed, and clenched his fists, intermittently opening his left eye to look around the room. Even after corrections, officers performed the first consciousness test. Calling out Smith's name and pinching him, he continued to show signs of awareness. After the second consciousness test, he still moved his right arm, indicating he was not fully unconscious. Number 3. Rectal feeding. At Guantanamo Bay, CIA operatives forced at least 5 detainees to undergo a procedure they referred to as rectal rehydration and feeding. The process is as barbaric as it sounds. Restrained inmates are made to kneel on the floor, naked, while a tube is forced inside them. Ostensibly, this tube delivers nutrients to inmates who engage in hunger strikes. However, the procedure is also recognized as a means of behavior control. One CIA operative noted regarding Abdul Rahim al-Nashiri, who was subjected to this cruel practice, "We used the largest tube we had." In another instance, the CIA's chief interrogator ordered the rectal feeding of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, without a determination of medical need. In the medical community, this risky procedure has almost universally been replaced with IV support. Complications of rectal feeding include damage to the colon and rectum, infection from food rotting inside the digestive tract, and prolapsed rectum due to careless insertion, among other serious risks. According to the CIA's own records, at least one Guantanamo detainee, Mustafa al-Hawsawi, was left with an anal fissure, chronic hemorrhoids, and rectal prolapse after being forced to undergo this procedure. Number 2. Overcrowded and underprepared. In 2015, when prison officials finally came to Nicholas Rodriguez's aid, he was already long gone. Rodriguez, who had gone missing during a riot 15 hours earlier, was found nearly sawed in two. Horrifyingly, most of his organs had been ripped from his body, and what remained of him was folded and stuffed inside a garbage can. While inmate homicides are tragically common in California prisons, 24-year-old Rodriguez's death stands out as particularly gruesome. Though the Vacaville prison was only a medium-security facility, many wonder how such a brutal killing could occur inside a locked, monitored environment, and why it took so long for officials to discover what had happened. 24 hours before Rodriguez's body was found, there had been an early morning riot in the prison yard. By afternoon, during the daily inmate count, guards noticed Rodriguez was missing. They assumed he had escaped, leading them to neglect his disappearance for hours. At the time of his death, the Vacaville prison, located just outside Sacramento, housed about 3,850 inmates, despite being designed to accommodate only 2,010. Number 1. Psychological abuse. In September 2013, Richard Mayer, locked up in Dade Correctional Institute's mental health unit, hanged himself. In his suicide note, Mayer accused prison guards of punishing inmates with starvation. He echoed the assertions of other inmates, claiming that officers forced them to fight and placed bets on the outcomes. Mayer also alleged sexual assault by prison employees, stating that one officer had asked him to strip and touch himself in exchange for cigarettes. Having been raped in the past, Mayer claimed that the officer was aware of his trauma. In his note, Mayer suggested he was in the mental health unit seeking help for his depression and suicidal tendencies, all of which had worsened following the recent sexual assault. He wrote that when he refused the lieutenant's advances, the lieutenant slammed him against the wall, kicked him in the groin, and told him to keep his mouth shut or else. Given that Florida spends less money per capita on mental health than any state except Idaho, Mayor's tragic death is sadly unsurprising, but it shouldn't be. Marie Peel is a public defender in the Washington metro area, with professional interests in indigent defense and prisoners' rights. When she isn't working, she enjoys photographing food, spending time with her rescue animals, and immersing herself in thrillers. Thank you for joining us on this eye-opening exploration of the torturous realities faced by inmates in modern prisons. Each story serves as a reminder of the urgent need for reform and a deeper understanding of the human rights that every individual, regardless of their past, deserves. Which of these practices shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more powerful stories from the darker side of society. Until next time, stay aware and compassionate.